Welcome back, everyone. Today, we're diving into a fast-moving, high-stakes geopolitical situation that's developing literally right off our shores. We're unpacking the suddenly escalating tensions between the United States and Cuba. To do this, we're going to impartially break down a fascinating recent Fox News broadcast. It detailed a whole array of dramatic developments, claims, and strategic moves from both sides. We'll look closely at what the sources are saying, strip away the noise, and get straight to the facts. Let's get right into it.
To understand just how severe the rhetoric has gotten, we have to look at how Cuba is reacting on the ground right now. According to the broadcast, the communist regime in Cuba is stating outright that it's preparing for war. They're reportedly handing out pamphlets to citizens with a pretty stark title, Family Guide for Protection Against Military Aggression. The text inside explicitly warns that the United States is threatening a military assault intended to, quote, annihilate the dream of Fidel Castro. That is some incredibly heavy, mobilized language to distribute directly to the public.
Section 1. Preparing for conflict. So what actually set off this current wave of tension? Well, the broadcast highlights a very specific trigger: the recent U.S. indictment of Raul Castro, which is tied to the Brothers to the Rescue murders. Cuba's deputy foreign minister was quick to react, calling this indictment a political action designed to lay the groundwork for an American invasion. But U.S. commentators view this move quite differently. Guest Rick De La Torre noted that this isn't just symbolic. It's Washington firmly signaling that the passage of time no longer guarantees immunity for regime elites. It's a highly calculated legal strike.
And these legal maneuvers aren't just happening at the very top of the Castro family tree. The broadcast detailed a really significant detention right here in the U.S. ICE agents in Miami reported detaining the sister of a top Cuban military official. Now, why does this matter to us? Because this isn't just any military official. This individual oversees a multi-billion-dollar military conglomerate that effectively runs the vast majority of Cuba's economy. The commentators point out that the U.S. is specifically targeting the financial machinery of the Cuban military, making sure humanitarian aid or U.S. dollars don't end up lining the pockets of this massive enterprise.
Section 2. The geopolitical threat. To understand this strategic shift, guest Mike Gonzalez provided a really powerful analogy. When asked if framing Cuba as a threat is fair or if it's just a broken island, Gonzalez was emphatic. He said it's an absolute myth that Cuba isn't a threat. He describes it as, and this is a great visual, a very large aircraft carrier 90 miles from our border. That number right there, 90 miles, is absolutely crucial. It completely reframes the situation for us. We aren't talking about a conflict on the other side of the globe. We're talking about alleged hostile operations happening incredibly close to the U.S. mainland.
So what exactly is happening on this aircraft carrier just 90 miles away? The broadcast outlines several severe geopolitical claims made by officials like Secretary of State Marco Rubio and the panel guests. First, they claim Cuba actively hosts a Russian and Chinese intelligence presence. Second, that Cuba has acquired weapons from Russia and China over the years. Third, commentators note reports of potential military drone activity operating right off the U.S. coast. And finally, Rubio asserts that Cuba is one of the leading sponsors of terrorism in the entire region. The framing here by the administration is that Havana is a vital node in a hostile network, tied directly to major global adversaries.
Let's drill down into that intelligence claim for a second, because the broadcast gets really specific here. Gonzalez claims that Cuba operates a signals intelligence base that collects vast amounts of electronic data. We're talking about the interception of everyday communications, your emails, texts, telephone calls. But the targets aren't just civilian. This intelligence gathering allegedly targets highly sensitive U.S. assets, specifically including Cape Canaveral and numerous important military bases across the United States. It's a stark reminder of how this proximity is allegedly being leveraged for direct espionage.
Section 3. Domestic disruptions.
Now, this next part is really interesting. Guest Mike Gonzalez makes a direct link between the Cuban government and domestic protests right here in the United States. He names specific activist organizations: the People's Forum, Code Pink, and the Tricontinental Institute. The source allegation here is that the leaders of these organizations are actually trained in Cuba. Gonzalez asserts that when you see protests in the U.S. against ICE or regarding Gaza or Iran, these are often just pretexts. He claims these organizations are fundamentally doing Cuba's bidding, causing mayhem and disruption domestically as an extension of Cuban state influence.
Section 4. The U.S. strategy.
Okay, so there's a massive core disconnect between the two nations right now. It's almost like they're reading from two entirely different playbooks. On one side, we have Cuba's claim fear. Their government is handing out pamphlets warning citizens of a kinetic U.S. military invasion meant to wipe out the Castro regime. But on the other side, if we look at the U.S. guest's stated strategy, an invasion isn't the plan at all. Guest Rick Della Torre explicitly states that the administration's strategy is straightforward, and it is definitely not military invasion. Instead, the real weapon of choice? Sustained pressure.
Let's break down what sustained pressure actually means in practice. The commentators outline three main pillars. First up, legal pressure, like we saw with the indictment of Raul Castro. Second, financial pressure, like targeting the family members of those running Cuba's military economy and ensuring U.S. dollars don't fund their operations. And third, intelligence pressure, countering their spy bases and drone activities. The overarching goal here is to drastically increase the costs of the regime's survival. And at the same time, this strategy serves as a really loud warning to adversarial powers like China and Russia that operating in the Western Hemisphere will carry severe consequences.
So taking all this in, it begs the ultimate question. It's the exact question the Fox News host posed to the panel to wrap up the segment. With Cuba actively preparing for war and the U.S. applying unprecedented, squeezing pressure, is this going to ultimately end in U.S. military action?
Section 5. A regime on the brink. The consensus from the guests on the broadcast is clear and honestly pretty striking. No, it will not require U.S. military action. Their prediction is that the current sustained pressure will lead to an organic internal collapse of the Cuban regime. They firmly believe the structural integrity of the government is simply too weak to withstand this new, aggressive posture without crumbling from the inside out.
The guests see this collapse playing out almost like a domino effect, step by step. Step 1. The U.S. demonstrates it's finally genuinely serious about ousting a regime it views as an enemy. Step 2. Because of this mounting pressure, the regime's henchmen and goons, the people who enforce the rules, beat up demonstrators, and run the prisons, start looking around and asking themselves, wait, what's in it for me? Step 3. These enforcers realize the risk just isn't worth it anymore. They abandon their posts, leaving no one to suppress the protests that are reportedly happening almost every single night on the island. Which leads directly to Step 4. Without the mechanics of state enforcement to protect it, the regime simply collapses under the weight of its own people.
I want to leave you with this final provocative quote from guest Mike Gonzalez summarizing this exact theory. Quote, "If nobody is there to harass them and put them in prison and arrest them, the regime collapses." It paints a picture of a Cuban state that is incredibly fragile, held together only by enforcement that could literally evaporate if the U.S. applies just enough of the right kind of pressure. So, what do you think? Is the strategy of sustained pressure enough to topple a regime that survived for over 60 years? Or is this situation bound to escalate into something far more dangerous just 90 miles from the U.S. border? It's a fascinating geopolitical chessboard for sure. Keep watching as this dynamic situation unfolds. Thank you so much for joining me to break this down today, and I'll see you in the next explainer.